Hi, this is Andrea Kane, and I am here with HIT 330 to talk to you about, whoops, it went a little bit too fast there, Chapter 10, Data Security. We are now on Week 10, and if you look at your syllabus, we are still on Unit Objectives 9.8.1 through 9.8.6, and we are still talking about HIPAA, ARRA, and HITECH. All right. If you open your book to page 285, that is the beginning of our chapter here, chapter 10. And we are still talking about HIPAA. Because HIPAA not only has that component of privacy, but it has the component of security. And security is the practice or means by which privacy is preserved or protected. So what does it mean about data security? It's really the measures and tools that safeguard the data and the information systems on which they reside from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction. So you think about all the cyber attacks that are going on out there. Data security is what it all entails to protect the privacy of that information, of the PHI. What are some elements of a data security program? Well, first of all, you want to protect the privacy of the data. Then you want to make sure it has integrity. It needs to be complete, accurate, consistent, up to date. And then you want to make sure it's available when needed to perform as expected. So if you are looking at your book, we are really on pages 286 and 287. And don't forget that the terms in your book that are in a different color other than black, like the, I don't know, they're sort of a pale teal, I guess, pale turquoise. Not sure how you would describe that blue-gray color. But anyway, it's pretty. And those terms are in the back in your glossary. So don't hesitate to stop and go through and look those up in the glossary. But anyway, getting back to these slides, so we're protecting the privacy, ensuring the integrity, and ensuring the availability. That's what's all involved in a security program. Well, what are you protecting it from? This is where we're going to talk about threats. You can have internal threats or external threats. An internal threat would mean, let's say you have someone who is angry at the organization and they decide that they're going to act out by damaging the information, by corrupting it, by stealing it, or by an unauthorized disclosure. And then you have external. And those external ones can be cyber attacks, phishing expeditions, and that's phishing, P-H-I-S-H, not F-I-S-H. You can have threats caused by people, threats caused by the environment. Think about the derecho storms. That caused a data security threat in that there was flooding, there was loss of power, there was damage to buildings, Wi-Fi was down, broadband was down. You have all these things. So that's another example of a data security threat. We don't often think about it, but it is. Floods can be as well. You know, if the river gets high, and from what I understand, not too terribly many years in the past, the Cedar River has flooded in Cedar Rapids and caused issues in the downtown there. And then hardware or software factors. If you have hardware that fails or software that has glitches in it that causes it not to capture information or secure information, those can all be threats. Threats from people. Well, you have people who make unintentional mistakes. You have those who abuse their access privileges. You have those who do it for spite or profit. You have those who try to access it or steal items for whatever reasons. And then you have some issues. Sometimes people leave and they're unhappy and they want to retaliate. Or you have outsiders that just want to destroy the organization or extort money or those types of things. So you have a wide variety of threats caused by people. And if you're looking at your book, we are now on bottom of page 288, and that goes into these as well. So moving on, social engineering. What is this? Well, social engineering is the manipulation of individuals or targets to freely disclose personal information or account credentials to hackers. Social engineering are those phishing attempts where they use a fake email to try and gain access and hack in. And so this goes through what is hacking, what is phishing, what is spear phishing, what is baiting, tailgating, all sorts of things. So phishing, it's the most common type of social engineering. It's accomplished through email, and they send what looks like a legitimate email, and then unfortunately, if you click on it, you have just opened your system wide open to something you should not have. There's also spear phishing, and that's similar to phishing, but it has the hacker has to do more work. They have to research the individual whose identity they're going to assume by looking up social media accounts or looking at their activity on the web, and then they assume that identity in and it's usually a high-level leadership position of the organization, and then can target other individuals within the organization to get more information. Baiting involves hackers leaving an infected USB or flash drive in a public area in the hope that someone will come by, pick it up, and use it out of curiosity. If it's used, the person's computer will become infected with whatever virus was loaded onto the USB or flash drive, and there you go. So if you see a USB or flash drive laying around and it is not yours, do not pick it up, and certainly don't put it into your machine, your laptop, PC, what have you, and try and bring it up. Very, very dangerous to do. Tailgating, that is a social engineering technique that allows a hacker, imposter, or other unauthorized individual to use an authorized individual's access privileges to gain access to a restricted area. So for instance, a tailgater is someone who will follow behind someone who's just swiped their badge to go into like the OR or to the family center or birthing place where there's newborns, those types of things, to get in. And so that's tailgating. You follow closely and take advantage of the situation of somebody else opening the door, whether that's electronically or whether that's physically. All right. Sorry, my allergies are bothering me today. Not sure why. All right. So what can be caused by environmental or hardware software issues? Well, we talked about natural disasters a few minutes ago. We talked about utility, hardware or software failures. Electrical outages and power surges can certainly have a huge impact on data security. If your hardware or software malfunctions, if you have malicious spyware or software applications, also known as malware, that ends up on your computer. Most people have some virus software on their computer, like Norton antivirus or those types of things, to I should have said antivirus software on their computers, to try and go out and sweep their computer on a periodic basis to make sure that no viruses have snuck on there. And that's a reason why, because it can corrupt files, it can corrupt your hard drive, and cause all sorts of awful things. There's tons of malware that's out there. And here we go. Types of malware. There's phishing, computer viruses, computer worms, Trojan horses, spyware, backdoor programs, rootkit, and ransomware. We've heard a lot about ransomware with healthcare organizations where somehow a hacker gets in, they set it up, and the hospital's IT system is basically shut down. Their EHR is shut down and locked by the hacker or by their group until the hospital or healthcare organization pays a very large ransom amount of money to get their system back unlocked. And there's no guarantee once they get it unlocked that it hasn't been wiped clean, that it hasn't been corrupted, or that the information hasn't been inappropriately disclosed. So very serious there. And if you're curious about this, this is on pages 290 and 291 in your book. All right, strategy for minimizing security threats. Well, one of the first ways is that most organizations have a chief security officer. They also have a chief privacy officer, but they have a chief security officer. It's someone who is responsible for making sure that data security protocols are in place and being maintained, and that the data is being protected and audited and all those types of things. They typically also have an advisory or policy-making group, such as an information security committee, an IT committee. They name it all sorts of things. It includes executive level managers. Typically, the HIM director or their designee is a part of that. Chief information officer, IT system directors, network engineers, and then there are usually several representatives from clinical departments, especially nursing, the therapies. Pharmacy often has somebody on this committee. Sometimes billing, patient registration, revenue cycle will also be there to be involved. The chief security officer is also responsible for making sure that the organization is following HIPAA's security rules, and there are quite a few of those. And on page 292 in your book, it talks about how the HIPAA security rule established a national standard for protection of individually identifiable electronic health records, that PHI we talked about in the last chapter. It doesn't specify the roles and components of an information security committee, but the responsibilities extend beyond that. And it goes into what those details are, so you can read through all that. And then it talks about what to do about security incidents. The chief security officer is responsible for investigating and reporting any type of security incident. And typically there's a reporting process within the organization, as well as sometimes if it results in a significant enough breach or issue, it may have to be reported beyond the organization. So they are heavily involved in that whole process. A good security program, what does it all include? It includes these things. Making sure employees are aware and supportive of the program. They need to know what it is, what they're supposed to be doing, when they need to be aware. One of the organizations that I worked at that was really good at this is they would send out alert emails. As soon as somebody got one that they thought might be phishing or spear phishing or anything like that, they would send it to IT. They had an email address that you could just forward those emails to. And you could forward them without opening them, which was really cool. So if you didn't recognize what you were receiving, you could just forward it to that email without opening the suspicious email. You could also open it and forward it as well. Of course, they didn't want you to click on the link, but what they would do is they would kill the link when they sent it back out to everyone to say, if you receive an email that from this group or from this person or that looks like this or has this information in it, they let us know, hey, it's fake, it's false. And they were on this 24/7, 365. It was great because you could come in the morning and you'd have 2 or 3 of these examples in front of you, and then you could look in your inbox and say, oh yeah, I got some of those too, and you could right away delete them. So it was really cool to have that and to really make the employees part of it, in that they knew to be aware, alert, reporting. They did some fun videos with the IT staff and other people in the organization to make people aware of what all involved and what to be on the lookout for. And they kept them in front of us. I would say probably on a once a month basis, they did something that was fun or interesting or educational that the employees could be aware of to protect themselves, whether that was at work or at home. And that was very helpful. And it really bought into people being a part of that and wanting to be a part of that. Risk management program, absolutely, risk management has to be involved. They need to know what's going on. They need to be aware. They need to be part of the plan to be proactive, but they also need to be able to be aware that if something's happened, to set aside the money in reserve if they're going to have to do some I don't want to say reparations. I want to say if they have to do some mitigation. For instance, if they identify that a breach has occurred and that they're going to have to provide maybe identity theft protection to a number of people, risk management can be involved in all of that. Access safeguards, helping people understand that they only have the access that they have because it needs to be on a job-related need-to-know basis, and that audits are being done on that. And it's to make sure that things aren't happening that shouldn't be happening. Really educating people about not getting up and walking away from a PC that they're logged into that may have PHI or access that way. Making sure devices, they may have stayed up maybe 10 seconds after somebody walks away, or that somebody can indicate to the computer that they're still working, and that sort of thing. That kind of gets into physical and administrative safeguards. I've also worked in organizations where they've locked down all of the monitors and PCs and printers and things like that so that they didn't walk away. Making sure that everything is password protected, everything is encrypted. For instance, if you had an iPad or you had a laptop, the organization made sure that those were password protected, but any PHI on there was encrypted, and that so that if the iPad or the laptop were lost or stolen, no one could access the PHI in there. And then of course there's I think that kind of covered physical, administrative, software, network safeguards, making sure that there's plenty of firewalls, making sure that those are constantly being tested to make sure that nothing is making it through the firewall. Sometimes it can be frustrating as an employee. You're trying to get to a website that's legitimate, that you need access to for your job, and you're running into the firewall. Or you're trying to get a report from a company that you work with and it's hitting the firewall and bouncing back, or you're not able to access their website through the firewall. It can be frustrating, but when you understand what's at stake, it's a lot easier to pick up the phone or to put in a work order or contact someone and let them know, hey, I'm running into firewall issues with this. Here's why I need to know it. Let them do the work of checking and making sure and setting up a safe way to exchange information or access systems where it's still protected and encrypted. And then disaster planning and recovery. You have to have plans for all types of disasters and to make sure that you're going to be able to still function if something happens. And what are you going to do if you do have to recover? Data quality control processes. How do you make sure that the data is accurate, timely, complete? How do you make sure that it is being maintained properly, that it is being amended appropriately or addended appropriately, that you're doing version control and all sorts of other stuff? That's all part of the components. And that information is on pages 294 and 295 and 296, 297, yeah, 298, 299, 300, 301, 302, 303, and 304. That's all of what we covered here on good old slide components of a security program. So now we're up to page 306, and we're talking about the triad of information security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I'm actually looking, is that further along maybe? Maybe I went faster than what I thought. Sorry about that if I did. Sometimes I get going and I just start flying, and I apologize. All right, well, anyway, that's what they're trying for. With information security, you want to maintain confidentiality, you want to be able to prove integrity, and you want to be able to provide availability. All right, so employee awareness. How do you train employees? How do you educate? Do you have annual signed confidentiality agreements? Do you have ongoing security reminders? And then this goes into risk management, the risk analysis, how you make sure that you're looking to see, do you have risk? If you have risk, how much risk do you have? Do you need to act on that immediately? Do you need to investigate other things first? What are you going to do about this now that you know that it's a risk? Is this something that's going to risk the organization's reputation, their finances, their ability to function? It goes through all of this. And then, of course, incident detection. You want to make sure that you're constantly looking to see are things going the way that they're supposed to, and if they're not, are they set up to alert someone so that they can be further monitored or investigated. And there you go, the incident response plan: watch and warn, repair and report, pursue and prosecute. All right, access safeguards. We talked a bit about role-based access, user-based access, context-based access control. Would really encourage you to go back to your book and take a look at all of that. The access part starts on page 297. And again, these are items in teal in your book, so you can go back to the glossary and take a look at those to get a better or more clear definition if what's in the book itself isn't clear enough. Identification, that's why we have user IDs. Authentication, make sure you have a good strong password or PIN. Sometimes your badge in a healthcare organization has a smart card in it that identifies you that you can just swipe. Biometrics, I worked in an organization where they asked patients for their right hand to scan their palm for biometrics. Because the veins in your hand, in the palm of your hand, are unique to you as an individual. If you weren't aware of that, that's true, as well as your retinal. Your retina is individual to you, your fingerprint. Voice prints are a bit harder because people can talk very similarly. But your palm print, your fingerprint, your retina, those are a lot harder to replicate if they're not the original. And then two-factor authentication, that not only do you have a password, but then you also may have a smart card, or or maybe you use a password and you use a palm scanner, those types of things. And then there's single sign-on, where once you sign in, you're signed into all systems. Authorization, we talked a little bit about that last week, or I'm sorry, not last week, last video with HIPAA privacy, but authorization is basically you're giving permission for something. And authorization starts on the right-hand side of page 299 if you're looking for more information about authorization. And then physical safeguards. This is where you can really get into server rooms and where those are located, and limiting access to different areas such as the OR and the birthing or family center in a hospital where babies are born and cared for, nursery, that type of thing. Having backup systems recovery, automatic logout after a certain number of seconds, those types of things. And I do want to address the secure and structurally sound locations. That is one of the biggest challenges with physician offices, is that a lot of times they put up walls pretty quickly, but they aren't a sound barrier. And you can sit in one exam room and hear the doctor and the patient in the next exam room and hear way, way, way too much information. TMI, WTMI. Well, that is one of the ways that physical safeguards need to be put in place to protect data security, data privacy. And unfortunately, not all organizations take that into consideration or take it seriously enough. And that's my personal opinion from having been out in the world. I've seen it done really well, and I've seen it done very poorly. All right, so on to administrative safeguards. That's policies and procedures, how things are disposed, how they're wiped clean, how they're, do you decide if you're going to resell them? Do you decide if you're going to donate them? Do you decide if you're going to smash them? And then software application safeguards, you have application control, authentication, edit checks, and audit trails. And I've talked about audit trails several times. Going through who's doing what, where to what. Do they have a legitimate job-related need to know for what they're doing? Network safeguards, talked about firewalls. There's also encryption, talked about that a little bit. Web security protocols and intrusion detection systems are all part of network safeguards. And then with disaster planning, you need to have a contingency plan. And it needs to talk about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, all of that. And yeah, it has to address resources, actions, tasks, and data necessary to restore critical services as soon as possible and manage business recovery processes. So how are you going to continue to operate during and after the disaster, and what are you going to do in terms of emergency processes and controls? Then with data quality control processes, it goes back to that availability. Is the data available to who needs it, when they need it, how they need it? Is there consistency? Is there a standard? Is everything in a consistent format? Are things prevented from being changed versus amended or addended to, so that data is not lost? And then you need to have a clear meaning for every data element. And we'll talk about data dictionaries when we get into a class that you will have next fall. Just trying to see if there's anything else here that they are thinking that we should focus on. Not really seeing it. Okay, so on. We're back to HIPAA again from 1996, and it talked about how security compliance became the responsibility for the Office of Civil Rights. And I mentioned that, I think, in the lecture for Chapter 9. HHS is responsible for HIPAA, but they established that security breaches would be the follow-up or domain of the Office of Civil Rights. So that's who is going to follow up on breaches, and that's who you have to report to. And HITECH went on. Remember, HITECH is a subset of the ARRA, and it improved the enforcement of privacy and security rules. It tightened those up, made them more specific, made them put some teeth into them, let's say. So some general rules when you're talking about HIPAA security. Your program has to document confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all ePHI, all electronic PHI. I mean, you still have to protect paper records, microfilm, microfiche records, videos, films, all those things. But really what they're focusing on here with the security provisions, for the most part, is going to be electronic PHI. Because remember, HIPAA was all about trying to advance the electronic health record, create standards for that, and talk about how all that would play out, even though the privacy piece does cover every type of form of PHI. Here, it's really limiting the discussion to ePHI. So you protect it against reasonably anticipated threats or hazards. You protect it so that it's not used or disclosed in a way that's not permitted under HIPAA. And you ensure workforce compliance with the security rule. And what is that security rule, you ask? If you're looking at your book, we're now on page 307, where it's talking about general rules. And then it goes on in page 308 to talk about administrative safeguards, physical safeguards, technical safeguards, organizational requirements, before we start talking about ARA. So what is the security rule? Well, it says that you need to be flexible, scalable, and technology neutral. Meaning, the flexibility is that the government isn't telling you exactly what to do and how to do it. They want you to figure out what is appropriate and reasonable for your healthcare organization. They want it scaled to accommodate your size of organization. So for instance, the things you may choose to do as an individual independent physician may be different than a very large healthcare system with multiple hospitals and multiple sites. However, both are required to have security measures in place that are appropriate and reasonable. And then the next piece is technology neutral. They don't tell you whether to have Epic or Cerner or something else. What they say is, regardless of what technologies you use or what systems you use or what servers you use or what software or hardware you choose to use, you still have to adopt security measures that are appropriate and reasonable and scalable. The security rule applies to covered entities. And if you're not sure what a covered entity is, look it up in the back of your glossary or go back to chapter 9 and take a look. It also includes business associates, hybrid entities, and other related entities. And let's see if they give us a little more information on this. I was hoping that it would define this for us. And I'm not seeing it. Not seeing it here. Well, maybe we'll run across a little bit more detail as we get into it, but pretty much everyone who's covered by HIPAA is covered for HIPAA privacy, is covered for HIPAA security, and there are some additional ones beyond it in HIPAA security. So back to the general rules again, we're still on page 307. The implementation specifications, there's some that are required, some that are addressable based on risk assessment. The provisions in HIPAA security, there's 5 categories. There's administrative, physical, technical, organizational, and policies and documentation. And again, those all follow starting on page 307 and go on through page 312. So if you're taking a look at your book, those are the pages you're going to want to focus on. Please make sure that you are familiar with these provisions. The fact that there are 5, what the 5 are, and what each one really means. Okay, so administrative safeguards, these list all of the administrative safeguards. And if you're looking at your book again, this is page 308 to top of 309. And your textbook does a really good job of going through what all of these are. So I'm not going to linger here on this slide to cover them because we're already 34 minutes in, and I don't really want to give you another hour-long lecture that you'd have to listen to. So let's keep moving forward. But your book does a great job with these. All right, physical safeguards. There are 4 of those that they want you to know and be aware of. And again, those are on page 310 in your book, and they talk about whether they're required or addressable. There's a nice handy table at the bottom of page 310, figure 10.5, that should help you. And on page 309, figure 10.4 will help you with the administrative safeguards as to what's required and what's addressable. Those are 2 really nice ways of looking at the information other than in paragraph form. So again, I'm going to refer you back to your book for these. Technical safeguards, that starts on page 310 and finishes on page 311. Again, the definitions are all right there that you can go through for all of these 5 items. And make sure that you're familiar with what all of these are. What do they mean? So make sure when you go back, these are administrative and have some good examples of those. These are physical. So you think about something you touch or use. These are technical. And then you've got organizational. And that's where you get into your business associate or other contracts and your group health plan requirements. And then you finish with documentation. What do you have to have in terms of policies, procedures, documentation? And the biggest piece of that is retention. Making sure that everything is retained as long as it needs to be retained, that nothing gets destroyed, that nobody can take a server to their home and wipe it clean, those types of things. So ARRA came along after HIPAA. HIPAA was sort of the baseline. Here's our first stab at it, legislative act for the whole country on privacy and security. And it wasn't too terribly long after HIPAA was implemented that people realized, you know what, there is nothing perfect in life, and this law, this good old HIPAA law, is part of that, and some things needed to be changed. So when the ARRA came along, there were several HIPAA revisions, shall we say, or expansions, revisions and expansions that were tucked into ARRA. And there was a whole section called High Tech that was added to it. So what this slide is it's what changed under ARRA and High Tech when you're talking about data security. Well, the first thing is that business associates have to comply with most of the same rules as covered entities when it comes to data security. If they don't, there was now an increase in potential business associate liability. When HIPAA first came out, business associates did not have the same liability. They were less liable. And this came through and said, nope, they've got to be just as liable. They've got to have as much skin in the game as a covered entity. Then it went on to say that breach notification was required when it came to breaches of unsecured ePHI. So notice that. Breach notification requirements for breaches of unsecured ePHI. Make sure that you understand what the definition is for unsecured ePHI. And that is in the glossary. So take a look at that. Make sure you're very familiar with that. And then it talked about encryption, that you needed to use encryption to secure ePHI. And it will affect data at rest, in motion, in use, and dispose. So it really clearly delineated that data security, that HIPAA data security was going to affect all types of data, regardless of where it was at or how it was being used or disposed of. Forensics. Forensics is an interesting field we hear a lot about, but not necessarily in terms of data. And that's really the context here, that Forensics, as they define it in your book at the bottom of page 313, is the process of identifying, analyzing, recovering, and preserving data within an electronic environment. So that's the definition you definitely need to know. And with forensics, there's typically a committee or designated individuals that review access logs, audit trails, and failed logins, among other things. I mean, they look at trigger events, they look at just anything that is a common. If you look back at, let me back up. If you look at data breaches, data security breaches, a lot of them have to have some things in common. They have some common types, so to speak. And those have been developed as trigger events. And when you start auditing based on those trigger events, a lot of times that's a great way to find if you've got some security breaches going on. Failed logins helps you identify if somebody's trying to get in who should not be. Monitoring can be based on events or situations. And again, I talked a little bit about these at different points. And these are good examples to keep in mind. So what is HIM? What is their role in all of this with data security? And that's on the bottom of page 315. Yeah, 315. Well, some organizations choose an HIM professional as their chief security officer. It's very, very, very rare, but it is possible. Oftentimes we are involved in audits. I was frequently called upon in one of my positions by one of our legal counsel who was both an associate privacy officer as well as in compliance and legal and all of that. And he oftentimes would have me work with IT when they were running audits to look at things. If he had questions or if IT had questions, whether or not it was an appropriate need to know, or to gather information on trigger events that might be used for audit trails. So I was involved as an HIM person in actual audits. And then risk assessments, I was involved in that as well, and you might be in an HIM role where they look at what are the risks for data security and how likely is it that something like that would hit our organization. And if it hit our organization, how major could it be? And what would we need to do if it happened? And what could we do in advance to prevent it from happening, and all those types of things. So was involved with that. And then there are other things that HIM does. They often participate in education and just to act as an advocate in the organization for data security and for following HIPAA and ARRA and high tech, and coming to the table to say, have you considered this? Have you considered that? They're just another voice of support for all of that. So our knowledge is important. Alrighty, well, there we have it. We are done with chapter 10. I will be back next week, which is week 11, to talk about chapter 11. In the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and hopefully this weather will warm up a bit for us. All right, talk to you again soon.